Mr. Blair has been wanting to speak. Mrs. Green, may I move on to him and come back around to you if you still have questions?
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Blair?
So in your opening remarks, you basically said that the school system was cutting services by eliminating this school. And I'd like to understand a little bit. I don't see how we're cutting services. We're just redistributing services to other facilities by closing this school. Is that correct?
You are absolutely correct, Mr. Blair. There are no services being cut. All the other options that Mrs. Green is alluding to were cut services, right? And so this was a way to still provide the same services a different way to all of our students without cutting really any of our services, which I thought was probably the most respectful and responsible way to go about this.
May I reply?
Mr. Collins,
May I
actually,
reply?
we'll get to everyone, but Mr. Collins is next, and then Mr. Bealow, and then back to you, Mrs. Green.
I just want to state, I know you've put a lot of time into this, and thank you for all the considerations that you've had, but if we do, entertain the possibility of a warrant article, if the Budget Committee does accept this, and we entertain the possibility of a warrant article to keep it keep the school open, put it to the voters, allow them to vote on it, I guess it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense for you to spend a lot of time trying to figure out the machinations of it closing just yet, because we still have time. The vote would be in March. You'd still have time to get through that process before you had to open in September. Does that make sense, or August? Late August?
That makes perfect sense, and to speak to my first choice is on this paper. It's right here. It's called first draft. That keeps the school open and running as is.
Right.
This is not my choice. This is not what I want to do. This is what we were being forced to do by the Budget Committee.
Mr. Bealow?
Are there other schools in the area that have a middle school that begins in 5th grade?
I believe the other school on our SAU, Hampstead Middle School, is grades 5 through 8.
Okay. So
Being
that
run by,
would be,
being run by Maria Denola, former assistant principal at our award-winning high school.
I know her well. Okay, so there's a working model for that already.
Correct.
Great.
All over the state, that model exists. It's not just here in Timberline.
Mrs. Green, did you want?
That's fine.
All right. Mrs. Delfino?
It's horrible to have to contemplate closing a school, and I know this was not a decision that you arrived at lightly. I'm sure you've put a lot of effort into it and done a lot of soul searching. What would be the alternatives? You talk about cutting services, the impact of finding $744,000 plus in savings in other areas. What would that mean in terms of staffing and in terms of programs?
Yeah, some of those other options really started to get into our music program, into our athletic programs, really started to reach to many kids. And so we wanted to find the absolute best way to continue the services as is without really impacting, thousands of kids in a way. So, the class size and our programs, whether they're advanced placement programs or whether they're Project Lead the Way or all these other really enriching kind of programs, we didn't want to like hurt a whole bunch of areas when we felt like, wow, this is a nice clean way to provide the same services without really taking a chip away from a whole bunch of little things. You know what I mean? So you bring mediocrity into a whole lot of areas instead of staying excellent, having an excellent high school with excellent programs, and having an opportunity to still serve our students. And then really the driver here was really when we looked at the elementary building direct cost per pupil. That building, we're just spending too much there.
That's really startling.
It was eye-opening. I was not aware that it was costing us 1.5 times to educate a student at Sandown Central compared to our other elementary schools. That was an eye-opener. I think that got our attention and said we need to really look at the most responsible and respectful way to do this, and keep our kids. I mean, ideally, to Mrs. Green's point about ideally, I'd love to be able to keep the Sandown kids in Sandown through 5th grade. But I got to really work closely with Ms. Georgian to say, can we really get 2 more grades into that school? Which means some other movement. There are other programs there. We might have to move out of that building and into another building. And so that's what I mean. There's a lot that goes on. There's a lot of pieces to this. So to Mr. Collins' point, spending all that time, I don't really know what the Budget Committee is, the direction that they're really going to go. We'll know a lot more, probably by the 23rd of December. But we'll keep working on this, and like I said, I have our middle school looking at fifth grades now in there, and Mr. Hogan's moving people around and figuring out a way to do it. It's a lot of work, because there's a lot of pieces that are moving.
Of course. Yep.
Mr. Sapia?
I'm kind of frustrated with this, and we don't want to see the school closed, but I have to tell you, all volunteers are good volunteers, and I've been to the last 2 Budget Committee meetings, and it's a little under the weather this weekend, so I had a chance to watch all the Budget Committee meetings twice. So I know who's been naughty and who's been nice. And what I will tell you is, and I think I struggle with how they came up with the number. They came up with that $67 million after their first meeting and a half back in April. With no data, with no information, with no understanding what kind of enhancements we could possibly make, or who knows if that number would go up or down. I have worked with budget committees as a selectman, I've sat on budget committees, and I've always been in favor of a needs-based budget, but just to throw a number out there after the first meeting and say 7 months later, we still want that number, without doing any of the research, any of the data, without asking correct me if I'm wrong, but every department head was told to level fund this year.
Correct.
You would have thought that the question would have been, because you're level funding, is there anything that you need, not that you want, that you need that you're not getting in the best interest of the children, of the students? And the numbers should reflect what gives us the #1 school system in the state. That should be our goal. Our goal should be excellence. And you know what? When I look at the difference of what we're talking about and what the consequences are, and to have zero flexibility, they had the same number they came up with after their first meeting and a half back in April, is the same number they stuck to, and disregarded those fixed costs that you have to deal with. I'll tell you one quick story, and it's commonplace for budget committees and boards to have their little head banging. But as a selectman, the consequence of going over that bottom line is quite severe. And when you have to sit around in month 12 and worry that you may go over that bottom line, which I did one year, it's not. So when I hear about surpluses, and it's smoke and mirrors. And I don't like the process that the Budget Committee went through. I appreciate their hard work. They volunteered, they work hard, but I think they were misdirected. And not to fund the hard work of the teachers and of the administration, I think was irresponsible. We all suffer. These are tough economic times. I make great money. My wife works 2 full-time jobs. We got 1 student in college and 1 going. So times are tough. I get it. But you know what? You have to fund. It can't go both ways. You simply can't have it both ways. So I think what people have to understand is, do you want our children going out? Wouldn't it be sad, and it had been suggested that maybe we cut back on the AP. Wouldn't it be sad if some kid didn't get into college because he's competing against, or she's competing against, that person from Salem, from Hooksett, from Manchester, Phillips Exeter, Phillips Andover? That's who we're competing against. And I'd hate for that one student, even if it happened once, to open up that acceptance letter and find out that they didn't get into a school because we didn't offer something, because we sold them down the road because we didn't want to buy a book. I think that would be a shame. And I hear a lot of disinformation out there, and I don't think it's fair. I think if you champion the truth, I think the voters are smart enough to make good decisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sapia. Mrs. Green?
Thank you. The truth is, the Budget Committee asked the administration to come in with a flat budget and then make arguments for why they needed increases. That's what was agreed to in the spring. Not come in with a zero budget and say, oh, we can't cut anything or we have to close the school. That was the arrangement. I see no argument here for okay, this is what a zero-line budget is, and then, if you want to keep a school open, then we need, we need $800,000 more. That's not the intention that the Budget Committee had when they instructed the administration to come back with a flatline budget. Project Lead the Way is $3,000 in nominal fees. Your travel and expense and,
Not even close, Mrs. Green, on Project Lead the Way. It's close to 200,000, but that's a nice shot at it at $3,000.
the contract said $3,000.
Two full-time
fees.
instructors.
Well, that's a different story. You're
Oh, it's the
paying
same
for
story. It's part of the
instructors-
program.
You're paying for instructors anyway. They would be science instructors if they weren't in Project Lead the
Let's stay
Way.
on topic. Let's stay on topic.
The point is that there are plenty of areas to cut in the individual schools. We could start with too many assistant principals. We could start with too many non-teaching professionals. I mean, there's a lot we could do if we looked at this more creatively and less punitively. This is a punitive budget, in my opinion. And, money does not buy excellence, Mr. Sapia. It certainly doesn't buy excellence.
I would agree with you 110%. I'm a fiscal conservative, and I don't believe throwing money against the wall makes it better. But to go out and create a budget after meeting 1.5 hours or 2 hours, whatever it was, and to say, this is the number, you might as well just pass the hat around and have someone pull a number out of a hat. It should be needs-based.
Point of order, we really, I'm
Thank
going to
you.
say, according to Robert's rules, you really need to address the chair when you
You're
have a
right.
comment after being acknowledged
You're
by
right.
the chair, so it's not to be a discourse or a debate between two board
So,
members.
Madam Chairperson,
But Mrs. Delfino is ahead of you.
by all means.
So I'm going to allow her to speak, and then I'll come back
that's
to you.
fine.
Thank you.
I will address this to the chair, according to Robert's Rules of Order. Madam Chair, I'm wondering if Mrs. Green could elaborate on where the expertise is coming from that we could, quote-unquote, cut assistant principals, that we could cut, non-teaching teachers. I don't know what that means. I'm wondering if perhaps you could ask Mrs. Green to elaborate on where she's getting this information and what expertise she has to make these decisions.
Would you care to speak to that expertise, Mrs. Green?
Yes, it was very well presented at the Budget Committee meeting in October, where there was a very good presentation by Mr. Green with respect to comparable districts and how much staffing they have compared to what we have. And higher achieving districts have fewer staff.
And
Mr. Collins could probably respond to that if you care.
Do you want me to?
I just to say, I think there was, again, I don't know what expertise Mr. Green has, and I don't know where he's getting his information. So I have no idea where he's getting his information or why he, where he gets the authority to make those kinds of judgments. And I know that Mr. Collins did have a very good presentation with some additional information that countered what Mr. Green said. So when we start talking about cutting staff and, you can cut staff here and you can cut staff there, what does that mean exactly for every school in this district and every student in this district? We're trying to minimize the burden. When you talk about an even budget, this is what we're talking about. This is how many hundreds of thousands of dollars we're talking about. It's real. It's real people, it's real students, it's schools, it's programs. And with all due respect, Madam Chair, to my fellow board member, we hear, there's just all these extra teachers and all these extra staff people that we could get rid of. Where are they? What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, I invite you to come to the December 7th presentation, where we will be discussing it at the Sandown Town Hall.
So, Madam Chair.
Why don't you discuss it here in a public meeting while everyone in the 4 towns is watching?
Because I'm not prepared to make this presentation right now. Would you give me a half hour on the next agenda, and I'd be happy to do so.
I have no idea what your presentation is, so I'm not going to speak to that right now.
Of course.